In part 1 of the Olympian Nutrition, we viewed the primary sources of the ancient Hellenic diet, namely Galen and Hippocrates, the efficacy of the diet, as seen with the example of Icaria, the region with the highest life expectancy in the world, and the evidence we have of the athletic versions of the Mediterranean diet from that time period. Part 2 will not just pertain to athletes, but to athletes and non-athletes alike. The ingredients mentioned can be used by anyone and for any purpose, be it weight gain, weight loss, or proper maintenance. I'll start off by going over the dietary sacrifices one would have to make in order to follow this plan. First and foremost, refined sugar. Bashing sugar has become as banal as it gets, but the fact of the matter is a wide range of common packaged foods contain sugar. Therefore, it is a significant sacrifice for those that are already well accustomed to a contemporary diet. Next is white flour of modern common wheat. I specify modern because there do exist differences between contemporary and ancient wheat species, but I'll get to that subject in more detail shortly. Next is butter and most plant-based oils, excluding olive oil. Although butter did exist in ancient Greece, it was hardly ever used when cooking, as they found it to be unhealthy when compared to olive oil. Only in Thrace was butter primarily used for cooking, and this because olive trees were not grown as much in the region. Other plant-based oils like palm, canola, soybean, peanut, sunflower, and so forth were non-existent. Now, Greeks did differentiate between olive oil qualities and paid special care to produce only the best types possible, which in this case is the extra virgin olive oil, though an even better quality is that from unripe olives, which is called aureleo. So, these are the three primary items that need to be excluded from one's diet, namely refined sugar, white flour of common wheat, and butter or plant-based oils. But there are other optional foods that didn't exist in ancient Greece and can also be omitted, though they wouldn't be harmful if consumed in moderation. These include coffee, tea, cocoa or chocolate, tomatoes, bananas, rice, potatoes, bell peppers, oranges, lemons, corn, and certain types of meat and fish like turkey or salmon. Additionally, because of the lack of proper refrigeration, foods were eaten either fresh, pickled, or cured with salt. Deep fat frying was also non-existent at the time, though stir frying and other methods of preparation were used, which will be touched upon as we progress. Let's now move on to the most common foods of the era that were consumed on a daily basis. First and foremost is olive oil, which was mentioned earlier. Next was a fermented fish sauce called gyros. Gyros was widely used as a condiment for a host of different foods and was similar to Thai cuisine's nam pla. Then we have honey, which was consumed both on its own and in mixtures, as the ancient Hellenists seem to have loved sweet and sour and sweet and savory combinations. There are many types of honey harvested in Greece, but the most common is thyme or heather based. Finally, the wine, which was consumed all throughout the day. It was mainly sweet and red wine, similar to today's fortified wines of 15 to 25 proof. Galen found that sweet, thick, red wines were the most nutritionally beneficial. His rule of thumb was red over white, thick over thin, and sweet over dry. When it comes to their daily diet, the section mentioned first, and most extensively in the accounts of both doctors of antiquity, is that of wheat. Wheat was considered incredibly important for obvious reasons, as most if not all people in that era relied on bread and other wheat byproducts for nourishment. But before I move on to their opinions on the matter, a bit more information about this plant. Each grain of wheat can be separated into three parts. The outer portion, called the bran, which holds most of the fiber of the grain, then the endosperm, which is starchy and contains most of the proteins, and therefore the gluten, and the germ, which is rich in micronutrients. There do exist many different species of wheat, though what is referred to as common or modern wheat makes up about 95% of all wheat products. Ancient wheat, on the other hand, refers to species like spelt, einkorn, emmer, and various other subspecies. Galen's tier list of wheat is as so. He places the naked wheats at the top, followed by einkorn, emmer, and then oats. Of these naked wheats, he has Selignion as best, followed by semigdali, then whole wheat, and lastly unwinnowed wheat. It's hard to tell what exact species of wheat Selignius refers to, but my best guess would be spelt, as he mentions it having a yellow tint when baked, and he does state that yellow breads and dense breads are most wholesome. The other type of wheat he mentions, semigdali, is called semolina in English and is made from only the endosperm of hard durum wheat grains. Whole wheat, of course, uses the entire grain, and unwinnowed wheat also includes the chaff. Galen specifically mentions that he also takes taste and preference into account, rather than just the nutritional value. This is also why both Hippocrates and Galen placed the naked wheats above barley, despite being aware of its rich nutritional properties. Barley groats in particular were said to be strengthening, nourishing, and wholesome. In regard to the matter of how all these aforementioned ancient wheat types compare to today's common wheat, well, many have claimed miraculous health benefits to be found in the ancient wheats, as well as an absence of gluten, but this is not true. The ancient wheats do have certain health benefits in comparison to modern wheat, as they do have less carbohydrates, more proteins, and different protein structures, as well as higher counts of macro and micro mineral values, like potassium, calcium, iron, and zinc. In addition, total phenolic content and vitamins were also significantly elevated for certain ancient wheat type species. And these benefits are all great, but far from what the marketing myths would have you believe. The downside with ancient wheats is their cost, and many sellers do take advantage of gullibility in order to profiteer off misinformation. Moving on to beans and legumes, the types that were held in high regard were lentils, particularly when cooked with pork, chickpeas, lupins, black-eyed peas, and faba beans. Galen in fact mentions that gladiators were fed faba beans on a daily basis, and though it provided them with sustenance, he notes that the results pale in comparison to pork meat. Many seeds, nuts, and seasonings were also used, with that in highest esteem being the fenugreek, which apparently holds a host of beneficial nutrients in high quantities. Sesame seeds were said to have been given to those looking to lose weight, as they are high in fat and therefore filling. Poppy seeds were also considered nutritious, strengthening, and even hypnotic by Galen. Together with sesame and flax or linseeds, they were either used as seasonings or boiled with honey in order to make what is known today as a pastelli. Other examples include walnuts, almonds, pistachios, chestnuts, capers, cress, mint, oregano, thyme, cardamom, cumin, dill, and pennyroyal. In terms of fruits, those believed to be the most nourishing and were eaten most often were two: figs and grapes. Though seasonal in nature, they were eaten all year round, accomplished by drying them in the sun. These dried figs and raisins could then last for several months unspoiled. Other fruits include blackberries, blueberries, apples, pomegranates, pears, and gourds, among many others. An honorable mention has to go to the olives, which of course are themselves a fruit and were considered incredibly healthy. Many different types of olives exist, as well as several modes of preparation. The olive and olive tree as a whole played a huge part in the lives of the ancient Hellenists. Other vegetables commonly eaten were lettuce, which many physicians regarded as the most beneficial green, then beets, cabbages, purslane, turnips, celery, carrots, garlic, onions, asparagus, and leeks. Finally, we have the animal products. Let me just preface this section by saying that it is a fact that humans must drastically reduce meat consumption for a host of different reasons, some of which are existential in nature. It is also a fact that most ancient Hellenists kept meat consumption to a minimum, with meats only being consumed on special occasions. The obvious exception here are athletes, who required meat to sustain their bodies through the vigorous training they were subjected to, and were only a fraction of the total population. The primary meat consumed by athletes, as was mentioned earlier, was pork, and both Hippocrates and Galen considered it to be the best of all meats for strengthening the body and keeping a lean physique. Beef was also held in high esteem for athletes, but Galen was aware of the ailments that result in the overconsumption of red meat. Rabbit and deer meat were believed to have high nutritional value, followed by lamb and goat meat. Generally speaking, wild animals were considered better for consumption than domesticated ones due to the more natural foods they ate as well as their plentiful exercise. This was also the case for fish, as wild fish were preferred over farmed, and pelagic fish over those found in shallow waters. Also, smaller fish, although less popular even in ancient times, were thought to be more beneficial than larger fish, which also holds true today, though for entirely different reasons. Anchovies and sardines, for example, have some of the highest omega-3 content of all fish species. Other commonly eaten soft fish at the time were sea gobies, several types of rockfish, sea bass, and the aforementioned anchovies and sardines. The general rule mentioned by Galen is that soft-fleshed seafood were better for keeping the general populace healthy, while firm-fleshed seafood like the red mullet, the horse mackerel, the sea perch, clams, mussels, and crustaceans were better suited for athletes. In fact, when it comes to the soft fish, he suggests that they are the best and most wholesome food for those not in training, followed by poultry, particularly hens and pheasants. Their eggs were also considered nutritious, and Galen believed that stifled or coddled eggs held their nutritional values better than those that were boiled or baked. He mentions that fried eggs were ultimately considered unhealthy. Though milk was seldomly consumed as a drink, when it would be boiled before consumption, at least on most occasions. Also, because of the lack of refrigeration, it would spoil rather quickly, so curdled milk was often used for cooking, in particular with wheat-based recipes, or it was made into cheese. They considered goat milk to be the best and most balanced type of milk, followed by sheep milk, and lastly cow milk. In terms of cheeses, there were several different types. For example, cottage cheese was held in high esteem. Galen states that young cheeses are better than aged cheeses, soft cheeses better than hard cheeses, and spongy cheeses were more healthy than dense cheeses. But of course, it's not just the ingredients themselves that are important, it's also how they're prepared, something that Galen was careful to differentiate when providing information on the nutritional value of each item. And, quite surprisingly, the Hellenists of antiquity had complex methods of preparing their meals. This includes boiling, roasting, stir-frying, the creation of compound mixtures, spit roasting, and more. To do so, they had frying pans, pots, mortars, boilers, saucepans, graters, ovens, and even burners with multiple hobs. In terms of utensils, they had a wide range of plates and cups, which would rest on three-legged tables, as well as spoons, a personal knife, and their hands. Forks were not in use at the time. The flavor profiles of ancient Greek cuisine differed significantly depending on region, but they mainly favored sweet and sour or sweet and salty recipes, as well as sweet desserts. These are all mentioned in detail in the full notes I've kept of all 3 books of the Regimen in Health, and all 3 books on the Properties of Foodstuffs. If you'd like a copy of these notes, I will place them under the Daemon tier of my Patreon page, in order to attain funds to make future videos on nutrition that require a budget, as I do plan on conducting interviews, cooking ancient Greek recipes, and creating a full meal plan similar to my video on the tetras. If you don't want to deal with Patreon, there is a link for direct contributions that also help support the channel. A special thanks to the Pankratiast, the Van, Panthera Tigris, Nero Advena, Just the Fish, Jabimothy Flimter, Caleb McKillum, and Ash Snape, the heroes, Whimsiest Tomcat and Caleb Gozeni, the Daemon, Patricius, and of course a very special thanks to the Olympians David Shuley and Alex. Once again, your continued support is truly appreciated and helps keep the channel alive. Cheers, and I'll catch you in the next video.